Well, hey everybody. In this video, I will go over the monthly spending plan form and specifically how to use it to develop a balanced budget. But before I do that, I want to draw your attention to the other forms included in this workbook. First, we have the transaction register. If you've been through our Financial Hope class, you'll recognize this as the form we use to manually track expenses. This form is divided into budget categories and is used to manually track all income and expenses for a period of 30 days. Next is the monthly spending plan, which we'll use to create our budget. And last is our spending guideline. Several years ago, a study was done to determine how successful individuals and families manage their money. In this study, they surveyed different types of people, such as singles, married couples, and of course, families with children. They also made sure that those surveyed were of different income levels, ranging from as low as $15,000 per year all the way up to $115,000 per year. What they discovered was that each of these individuals or families were able to manage their income in such a way that they were able to meet their needs and save for the future, and they deemed this to be successful money management. In the end, they came up with these guidelines based on the study and made them available to help people have a reference for how to successfully manage money at different income levels. You will note that the guidelines have been broken up into different family types. We have single without a roommate, single with roommate, single parent, married couple, family of 4, and family of 6. We also have varying income levels for each family type. As you use this guideline, choose which family type and income level closest describes you. Please note that each guideline includes the same major categories such as housing, food, and transportation. Also note that although the percentages differ from one income level to another, the total percentage spent is always 100. As you use this guideline to create your own budget, you may need to adjust the percentage of each category to ensure all your family needs are met. However, you may not allocate more than 100% of your total income. Doing so will mean living beyond your income and adding to your debt. Let's begin going over the monthly spending plan form, and you will see how the spending guideline fits into building your own balanced budget. As you can see, the first column lists all the categories and subcategories in the same way the tracking register form does. In the second column, titled Actual from Register, you will enter the total income and the total expenses from each category on your tracking register form. If you haven't tracked all your income and expenses for the past 30 days, you will need to do so before attempting to build your own budget. I will now enter all the numbers of my budget example. You will notice that as I enter the amounts, the percent of each main category is calculated automatically and entered in the percent of net income column. This represents the percentage of each category of the total net income. In other words, food represents 9% of the $3,250 net income. Please also note that in the categories that contain subcategories, I enter only the subcategory amounts and the total category amount is calculated for me, along with the percentage. I will now enter all the budget amounts for the rest of the categories. Now that all the amounts have been entered, you'll notice that there's a $348 amount being spent over the income being brought in, represented by this number here. Also, the percentage of net income being spent is 111%. That means we are overspending by 11% each month. Now let me show you how to use the next section to create your own budget. First, we will need to transfer the suggested percentages from the spending guideline. I will be using the married couple with $35,000 income as my guideline since it is the closest income to the actual income in my example. You will notice that the suggested tithe is 12%. This is because we are working with net income. In reality, you will want to calculate your tithe as 10% of the total gross income and benefits you receive. This will make the net percentage a little higher. However, ultimately we use the dollar amounts, not the percentages, to manage our budget. The percentage guideline is only used as a tool to help us benchmark our budget based on these suggested guidelines. I will now carry these figures to the monthly spending plan worksheet. I will need to do this manually by entering each category percent here in the guideline percent column. Now that I've entered all the percent values, you will notice that the guideline amount for each category is automatically calculated and entered for me. You will also notice there isn't a suggested percent for child expenses or debt. This is because these categories do not apply to everyone. If you have childcare expenses such as daycare costs, you will need to adjust other categories to allow for this expense. There is also not a suggested percent for debt because the ultimate goal would be to carry no debt. However, if you currently have debt, you will need to adjust other categories to allow for the debt payments until you have eliminated your debt. In our example, the debt payments represent 8% of the net income. For now, the debt has to be satisfied by making the monthly payments. Once this debt is paid off, we can allocate the $250 to other categories. The next step is to compare the percent of net income to the guideline percentage. This will help you to recognize any categories that may be abnormal. Please take into account that the guideline is just a reference and you do not need to abide by it exactly. Some of your categories may be higher or lower than the guideline. This is normal. However, remember that the guideline was developed by taking real-life examples of what successful families were spending in each of these categories. If your numbers are abnormally different, it may indicate that you need to consider making some changes. Ultimately, all 100% of the income is yours, and you may allocate it as you need. But you must remember that each of these categories in your budget should be properly funded. If one category is too high, it will reduce the funds necessary to properly fund other categories. This may lead to budget shortfalls and financial hardships in the near future. Once you've compared your expenses to the guideline, it's time for you to develop a balanced budget. This is where some tough choices might have to be made. You may need to cut some discretionary expenses temporarily until your financial situation becomes more stable. In time, as your financial situation improves, you'll be able to allocate money back in to allow for some of these expenses. But for now, you must aggressively cut any unnecessary expenses. I recommend going through each expense in each category and prayerfully consider which ones are needed and which ones can be eliminated. Continue until you have a balanced budget. In this example, you will notice that most categories are very close to the suggested guideline. Giving, food, housing, miscellaneous, and personal are very close to the percent suggested by the guideline. The only exception is recreation. It currently shows to be at 16%, and the guideline suggests that categories should only be 5%. Since I know I'm overspending by $348, I will need to make some cuts. Therefore, I will look at cutting from this area first, since it doesn't represent a basic need like food, and I'll make the necessary adjustments here. If cutting from this category will not balance my budget, then I must look at other areas and continue reducing my expenses until I have a balanced budget. Going further down on this form, I can see that transportation is where it should be. Saving is a little low when compared to the 12% suggested, but since I'm currently overspending, I will need to first balance the budget before I can allocate more towards savings. In time, the goal is to increase savings to the suggested guideline. Perhaps after the debt payments, which is 8%, is paid off, I can move the $250 to savings. In developing a balanced budget, I will enter all my allocations in the last column titled Budget Amount. You'll notice at the bottom of this column that there's a Net Income Minus Expenses cell. Before entering any allocations, this cell represents net available income. As you allocate this income to different categories, this amount will diminish until you reach zero. In other words, you are taking your total net income and distributing it to all the categories in your budget. Once you've done it, it should show zero, indicating you've given every dollar a job. I will now enter all the amounts for the categories and subcategories that are in line with the spending guidelines first. Then I will look at how much money is left over and allocate those other categories next. Now I realize that this is a very basic and somewhat simple example, and that creating your own budget may require more difficult adjustments. Therefore, I suggest you begin by allocating all the expenses that represent your basic needs. Expenses like housing costs such as rental and utilities, food, transportation, savings, and clothing. Next, you should allocate for any debt that is collateralized, such as a home or a car payment. Then and only then take a look at what you have left over and fund the rest of your categories. Now that I've entered all the amounts in the categories that match the spending guideline, you'll notice that I have $187.50 remaining. However, I have not allocated anything to the recreation category because I knew this is where I was going to make some cuts. So let's do that now. I will allocate $40 to his and hers subcategories. This is what we refer to as blow money. You take it out in cash and use it however you want. You don't even need to track what you spend it on. It's all right to have a little bit of blow money. Actually, I recommend it, especially when other categories are really tight. Having some free spending money is a good way to relieve some pressure, and it helps you avoid blowing your budget in other areas. Of course, you'll need to use good judgment when setting this amount. Next, I will allocate $40 to entertainment. This is for events such as going to the movies or a ball game. And last, I will allocate what I have left over, $67.50, to the vacation fund. Notice that once I've allocated all my income, the net income minus expenses cell shows $0. This shows me I've taken all the income and I've allocated it to the budget, leaving me with zero funds. If I were to allocate too much to a category, say I make savings $250, it will show that I've over-allocated or overspent my income by $50. Once you've created a zero-based budget, you will let this new budget direct your spending. The key thing is to continue tracking expenses while using this budget to direct how much you can spend in each category. Well, that's it. I hope this tutorial will help you in creating your own balanced budget so that one day you can enjoy financial freedom. Thanks for watching.